U.S. President Barack Obama outlines his plan for closing the prison at Guantanamo Bay. The impact of El Niño's trail of destruction in Africa. And cashew production booms in Ivory Coast. Africa 54 starts right now.
Good evening and welcome. I'm Vincent Makori. This is Africa 54. Now, Amnesty International says the global situation for human rights deteriorated in 2015, with the systems designed to protect basic rights themselves under attack by the governments. This assessment comes in Amnesty's annual report. Henry Ridgewell has more from London.
Amnesty International says Syria's brutal civil war remains the most urgent crisis. Amnesty's Tirana Hassan recently visited the Turkish-Syrian border at Kilis, where 58,000 newly displaced refugees have massed waiting to cross to Turkey.
Who were basically fleeing relentless airstrikes from Russian and Syrian forces. And we documented cases of airstrikes against schools, against hospitals and against civilian homes. Russia and Syria are targeting civilians and civilian objects, and that most definitely is a war crime.
Turkey has refused to open the border. The country is already hosting more than 1.5 million Syrian refugees. Amnesty says Europe must do more.
Europe has basically tried to make Turkey its border guard, and that is not working out. The people who are at the Turkish border right now are absolutely desperate, and they're resorting to using illegal smuggling routes. And we documented multiple cases where Turkish border guards had been firing live rounds on refugees.
The Syrian crisis sits against a backdrop of a deteriorating human rights situation globally, according to Amnesty's latest annual report.
The UN Security Council and the so-called international community continues to watch helplessly as Syria faces a complete meltdown. But it's not just Syria. Iraq, Yemen, Libya, Burundi, North Korea are all in a precarious condition.
The Amnesty head went on to warn that the systems designed to protect human rights are under attack.
Countries that have signed up to the Refugee Convention are shamelessly flouting it in the face of millions fleeing war and persecution. Many African countries have clubbed together, threatening to walk out of the International Criminal Court. At the regional level, the European human rights regime is under threat.
The Amnesty report highlights some successes in 2015, including the release of 3 Al Jazeera journalists detained in Egypt and the opening of an international criminal court investigation into the situation in the West Bank and Gaza. Henry Ridgewell for VOA News, London.
U.S. President Barack Obama has outlined his administration's plan for closing the military detention center at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. But as VOA Pentagon correspondent Carla Babb reports, the proposal faces an uphill battle in Congress.
When it becomes clear that something is not working as intended, when it does not advance our security, we have to change course.
President Obama Tuesday urged Congress to close the American prison in Guantanamo Bay and sent a plan to Congress outlining the steps to do so.
Clear!
He said that past claims of torture at the facility have been used as a terror recruitment tool. Islamic State victims have been paraded around in orange jumpsuits similar to those worn by Guantanamo prison detainees.
For many years, it's been clear that the detention facility at Guantanamo Bay does not advance our national security. It undermines it.
The pushback from Congress was immediate.
This is what I think of the president's plan to send terrorists to the United States.
So we'll review President Obama's plan, but since it includes bringing dangerous terrorists to facilities in U.S. communities, he should know that the bipartisan will of Congress has already been expressed against that proposal.
Most analysts say the plan has no chance of passing in Congress.
It's purely politically driven. There are individuals who are so opposed to the Obama administration, and I believe Obama personally, that they are simply unwilling to participate in any activity that might further his goals.
Obama can still issue an executive order to transfer the prisoners to U.S. soil if Congress refuses to work with him. But according to law professor Gary Solis, that choice would bring serious constitutional problems, which would likely have to be sorted out by the U.S. Supreme Court.
He would be acting against the express wishes and the express actions of the Congress that passed legislation, passed laws, prohibiting what he would be doing.
In the meantime, the administration will work toward finding allied countries to take the 35 detainees at Guantanamo already approved for being transferred out of the base. But the future for the remaining 56 prisoners is unclear.
Now for more on the Pentagon's plan to shut up the Guantanamo Bay prison, VOA's Carla Babb joins me in studio. Carla, welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you for having me.
Now, why does President Obama want to close down this detention center rather badly?
Well, for him, it's really about the United States values. This Guantanamo Bay facility has been torture has been coming out of that. Just the way the interrogation has gone, President Obama sees that as the opposite of what the United States stands for. The United States is supposed to stand for this beacon of human rights, and he says that this is a stain. The other reason, if that's not enough, is the cost of this massive detention facility. It cost last year alone $450 million, and if these detainees were moved, it would save between $60 and $85 million a year, and President Obama says that's $1.7 billion over 20 years. So that's a big incentive.
We saw a rather visual, strong statement there with the gentleman crushing the piece of paper. Question is, why are they so opposed, those ones are opposed to the closing of this camp, of this detention center?
Well, a lot of U.S. lawmakers have the idea of it not in my backyard. I don't want a terrorist being housed anywhere near me, and so therefore I'm not going to support housing a terrorist anywhere near any of my colleagues. So that's a big collective part of it. Another part is that if these detainees were to come to the United States, President Obama is suggesting that they be tried in federal courts. And we are still technically in a war against terror. And so the military can go, if they find new information, they can go and question these detainees about this. Now, if there were trials in federal courts, it would be over. These detainees would be tried and either convicted or let go. So a lot of the lawmakers say, well, we're not ready to do that yet because the war is still ongoing.
Some will say, well, that was a long time ago. Why has it taken this long to try these people?
Well, the military says that they're trying to be very cautious because they take their job very seriously trying these terrorists, and they don't want to miss something or to have a technical error that puts these terrorists and lets them free. The other process is the transferring of detainees, and that's not going to be easy and quick because who wants to take the United States terrorist problem? It's very hard to find allied countries that are willing to take in these terrorists.
Now, very quickly, you did mention in your report that the 56 remaining face a rather uncertain future. Is there any update?
Well, what we're looking at is essentially 10 of those are going through this military commissions process, so they could potentially be transferred out. We don't really know at this point. It's a wait and see, but that still leaves 46 that there's a big question about.
Big debate ahead of us, for sure. Thanks a lot, Carla.
Thanks for having me.
Well, Carla Babb is VOA's Pentagon correspondent. Now, the United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon visited a camp for displaced people Tuesday in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, where several shelters for people fleeing conflict are under threat of closure by the authorities. Now, the camp located in Kichanga, a town of 80,000 inhabitants in northeast of Goma, is home to around 15,000 people. That's according to the UN. Mr. Ban met with some of the women in the camp and visited a school where he shared a hot lunch with children. The number of displaced people in DRC stood at 1.6 million at the end of September, with North Kivu province having the biggest share at over 600,000. Now, opposition parties in Niger have rejected initial results from Sunday's presidential election that showed incumbent Mahamadou Issoufou leading, calling them fraudulent. Provisional results from 20 of the West African countries' 308 municipalities gave Issoufou 40% of the vote, more than 10% points ahead of his closest rival. The provisional results showed Hama Amadou, a one-time ally of Issoufou, who has been jailed since November, received 29% of the vote. Iseni Umaru, leader of the opposition, got 12%. Well, we want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we cover. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. And check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Find me on Twitter at VOA Vince Makori. Well, coming up, the El Nino drought leaves millions hungry on the continent. Stay with us.
Health news and notes. This is Living Better.
Could a visit with your doctor be just down the hall? In France, doctors can make virtual home visits over the internet. The patient enters a consultation station, also called an e-booth, and manipulates diagnostic tools at the prompting of the doctor. Vincent Hillenmeyer is with H4D, the company that makes the e-booth.
H4D manufactures the consult station, which is a telemedicine kiosk which replicates the environment and the equipment of a doctor's office.
Doctors can get basic information from their patients in the booth.
There's a stethoscope. There's also a tool called the otoscope. It's for ENT examinations, ear, throat, and nose.
Doctors say the e-booth can save significant travel time for them and their patients in rural areas, allowing physicians to have more time to see more people. I'm Martin Seacrest for VOA's Living Better.
Well, it's time for a business report, and one of the most widely followed business stories on global scale is the drastic decline of the Naira. Joining us from New York is Africa 54 business correspondent Jill Malandrino to discuss the local and macro impacts to the economy. Hello, Jill.
Good morning, Vincent. So Nigeria is a special case on many levels because it's Africa's largest crude producer and the continent's largest economy. The Naira and stock market have been hit hard by the rapid decline in oil, which in turn triggers a fall in government revenue and an exit in foreign investment. So this leads to a capital flight and curbed output or exporting in the economy. When a situation like this occurs, you should be able to fall back on currency reserves, but unfortunately, Nigeria did not save in the oil boom years and spent frivolously.
The question is, what can Nigeria do now to balance out that situation?
The biggest debate here lies in whether or not President Buhari will support devaluation of the Naira. When developed nations compete among themselves, like Japan, the United States, and devalue their currency, it allows them to be competitive and manufacture and export more. Buhari remains staunchly opposed, as his comments from the Africa 2016 conference held in Egypt reflected, despite urging from institutions like the International Monetary Fund.
Now, some will say, why is Buhari resisting devaluation when Nigeria is in such a delicate economic situation? I mean, South Africa did devalue the rand in January.
That's the million-dollar question, Vincent, and the source of a very passionate debate. Nigeria is a very special situation due to its position from an economic and demographic standpoint in Africa and with the world. Buhari took on the monumental task of reformation in the government and with Nigerian business following decades of rampant corruption. Buhari said at Africa 2016 that the only way for Nigeria to escape dependence on oil and strengthen the economy is to focus on agribusiness and infrastructure. He wants to become more self-sufficient. His argument essentially is, why should Nigeria devalue when she imports and everything is, they export very little? And that's really where the debate lies.
Wow. Well, Jill, thank you very much.
Thank you, Vincent.
Africa 54 business correspondent Jill Malandrino reporting live from New York. Well, emergency food aid for 10 million Ethiopians hit by the worst drought in 50 years is expected to run out in April. That's unless donors provide $245 million by the end of February, according to the charity Save the Children. Without additional funds, there could be a potentially catastrophic escalation in severe acute malnutrition among children, which means they're likely to die without therapeutic feeding. Ethiopia's failed rains, which meteorologists blame on the El Nino weather phenomenon, have created a drought in some areas of the country worse than the 1994 crisis. Back then, water shortages and conflict combined to cause a famine that killed an estimated 1 million people. Now, for more insight into the situation in the Horn of Africa, I'm joined by Paul Dorosh. He's the Director for the Development Strategy and Governance Division at the International Food Policy Research Institute. Mr. Dorosh, welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you.
Now, question is, was this a predictable situation, especially in the Horn of Africa?
Well, the Horn of Africa, as you know, has periodic droughts. And as you also have described, this drought is especially severe. So that part is predictable. And the government of Ethiopia has made major strides in preparation for this kind of drought and for other natural disasters in the country.
Yeah. Now, were there plans that were made to at least reduce the impact of this drought? And if so, why have they not mitigated this effect?
Well, there's been a lot of progress in the safety nets in Ethiopia over the last 10 years or so. The Ethiopian government has instituted, along with the donors, a productive safety net program. And in that program, households are identified at the local level who are in need of food assistance over time, and food aid that comes into Ethiopia and other money from the Ethiopian government is targeted to these households. So that is in place, and that productive safety net program is being scaled up now. So that's a very good channel to deal with the effects of this drought at the household level. What's especially difficult about the effects of this drought, though, is that it's especially hit hard the eastern third of the country. And there's less than 10% of the population of Ethiopia living in that eastern third. But in those pastoralist areas, these households are dependent to a large extent on their livestock. There's some crop agriculture. But livestock have been very hard hit, and that means these households have been very hard hit by water shortages and so forth. The drought has affected the highlands as well, but it's particularly severe in the eastern third of the country.
Now, every time we mention drought, we also mention famine. Do they always have to go together? I mean, must there be hunger, famine if there's drought?
No, and the good news is that there are things that can be done. A lot of lessons were learned from that very serious famine in the mid-1980s. One of the things is that the Ethiopian government, after that, made a big effort to invest in infrastructure, in the roads, in the telecommunications, and so forth, that help move food from one place to the other, that let people know what the situation is. There's also been a big investment in agriculture over time. Ethiopia actually doubled its food production, its cereal production, in the last 10 years. So those things have been done. And then again, very importantly, getting the food to the households that are in need. This year, it's likely that cereal production will only be down perhaps 10%. But the people on that eastern third of the country are in definitely need that relief effort.
But what I'm hearing here, there is food in the rest of the country. There's only this small part of the country that doesn't have food. So is the problem just making that food available, or rather getting it to the needy people? Is that the biggest problem?
Broadly speaking, that is perhaps one of the biggest problems. There's also an issue of those of children, mothers who have severe nutritional problems because of this drought, because of a shortage of food.
But it means that somebody didn't act quick enough. I mean, there's food in other parts of the country. All was needed to be done is to transport that food and make sure those people get it in time, right?
Well, I think, broadly speaking, we're still in time.
Yeah.
The calls by the different NGOs, even the government, are to make sure that things don't get very bad 4 months from now. And so this aid that comes in is very, very important. But also, the households affected by the drought directly, I mean, those households, that livestock, water is a big issue. It's not just cereal, it's not just supplemental feeding.
In a few seconds, are we in any way about to witness what we did witness way back in 1984?
I don't think so. I'm quite optimistic that the programs in place, the productive safety net, and as well as the attention that the world, the donors, the government have been giving to this problem, mean that steps will be taken. I think we learned a lot of lessons from 1984, and I'm quite optimistic that those lessons will be applied in this situation.
Hopefully nobody loses their lives.
Yes.
And hopefully before the end of February, the money that has been pledged will come in. Thanks, that's all. Mr. Dorosh, thank you very much. And Paul Dorosh is the Director for the Development Strategy and Governance Division at the International Food Policy Research Institute. Well, it's time now for a short break. Still to come on Africa 54, well, cashing in on the cashew nuts boom. We'll be right back.
All these cuts will not mean a reduction in social ground.
What we're trying to do is to de-escalate the conflict, making sure that they simply cannot travel those roads. And it tries to attract, through the migrant flow in Africa, it tries to attract foreign fighters into Libya.
South Sudan. None of the investigations initiated.
Droughts, lake roads.
So we hope that now President Nkurunziza will translate these words into action.
اسمي يونس الشقوري لما قبض علي صار تفضل
Welcome back to Africa 54. Here's what's trending. What message are the 2016 presidential candidates sending to voters with their fashion choices? While style experts say the candidates' choices are no accident, every fashion decision, or even the decision not to follow fashion trends at all, is carefully considered. Hillary Clinton is being advised to wear brighter colors, which are considered a more executive look for a woman. On the Republican side, the main differences between the candidates can be seen in their approach to casual dressing on the campaign trail. While frontrunner Donald Trump is rarely seen out of his suits, Ted Cruz presents himself as a blunt-talking Texan right down to his cowboy boots. Well, here's a fashion story of another kind. Well, a Swedish tech company has developed a tablecloth embedded with smart fabrics that turn ordinary cloth into musical instruments. That tablecloth is woven with conductive fibers and embedded with sensors. The on-off switch, well, human touch. The tablecloth technology is part of a growing trend in the field of wearable electronics, using the sensory technologies found in devices like Fitbit into the clothes you wear. Well, what goes best with a musical tablecloth? Automaker Nissan has developed a unique solution to the problem of tidying up rows of chairs after office meetings. The Japanese firm has invented self-powered office chairs that park themselves back into their original position with a simple clap of the hands. The company placed 4 motion-sensitive cameras in the corners of a ceiling and used them to track regular office chairs on wheels. The Wi-Fi controlled cameras detect each chair's location and calculate a route back to its starting point. Nissan's promotional video of the chairs has quickly become a viral internet hit. And that is what is trending today. While Ivory Coast is cashing in on cashew nuts. Over the past 10 years, the country increased its production by 400% and recently overtook India as the world's top cashew nut producer. But the sector remains challenged by the lack of domestic processing capacity, which impacts its revenues. Emily Eob reports from Abidjan.
The harvest has just started, but the mood is good among cashew farmers in Ivory Coast. This year again, the government announced an increase in the minimum selling prices. Raymond Kouakou, a former real estate agent, started planting cashew trees in his home village back in 1999.
My friend told me that cashew production could put food on the table. He encouraged me to start.
But the development of the budding industry was put on hold until 2011 as the West African nation entered multiple political crises. Now the sector is growing again thanks to increasing global demand. National production almost doubled in the last 5 years alone to reach 25% of the global output, making Ivory Coast the world's top producer ahead of India and Vietnam. The government played a major role in developing and regulating the sector by setting control and minimum prices through the same group that also regulates cotton production. Producer and buyer Aruna Konate says it helped a lot.
Borders were very porous. Our product would go to the neighboring countries. And there were also a lot of speculation because we didn't really know what was the global market price for cashew. But now, thanks to Cotton Cashew Council, it's all right.
However, Ivory Coast only processes about 6% of its total cashew production. The nuts are sent to Asia to be processed, then sold to consumers in the US and in Europe. For Cotton Cashew Council Director Malamine Sanogo, increasing domestic processing is the next key step to developing the industry.
We believe that if we domestically process the cashew, we should be able to increase the farm gate prices by 80% if I compare to other countries.
Sanogo says the Ivorian government plans to domestically process all of this cashew production by 2020. Emily Eob for VOA News in Abidjan.
Well, and that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. For more news, tune in to VOA's evening radio show, Africa News Tonight, at 1800 UTC, and in the mornings today, Break Africa between 0300 and 0600 UTC, Monday through Friday. Thanks a lot for watching. From all of us here in Washington, have a good night.
Welcome to English in a Minute. We all need to breathe to live, and even the best swimmers can hold their breath for only so long.
Don't hold your breath.
Is this a warning for swimmers and divers?
Hey, do you need help moving to your new apartment this weekend?
Oh no, that's okay. Evan said he would help. He has a truck.
Evan, don't hold your breath waiting for him. He said he'd help me move, then never showed up.
Oh, well then. What are you doing this weekend?
We say don't hold your breath when we think something is not likely to happen soon, if ever. Sometimes children threaten to hold their breath until they get what they want, which usually does not work. You can also say, I wouldn't hold my breath. And that's English in a Minute.